The mist did not merely surround the world. It pressed against the glass of the gondola, thick and gray.
Okay.
Mira watched the opacity swirl, her knuckles white
Here we
as she
go.
clamped her hands onto the suitcase handle. The vessel groaned, a thin, metallic sound that echoed in the vast, empty sky. Then, the haze parted. Lanternhollow Academy loomed ahead, a jagged silhouette of stone towers suspended in the void. It hung motionless,
my gosh.
silent as a
It's even
tomb.
more beautiful than I imagined.
The gondola hit the docking platform with a jarring thud that vibrated up through the
Whoa.
floorboards.
What was that?
She remained seated for a heartbeat. Myra, new school, new everything. You can do this. Staring at the cold, damp stone waiting outside. Her pulse hammered
we
against
see
her
this?
throat. She stood, the suitcase,
Okay.
feeling like lead in her
Let's
grip,
see what's down
and forced
there.
herself toward the threshold. Every step across
I
the
just want
landing
to
was
go
deliberate.
home.
The stone beneath her boots slick with condensation. She looked up at the
Wow.
towering spires, their peaks lost in the swirling fog above. The silence here was heavy, pressing down on her shoulders,
scared.
demanding a presence she was not
What if I'm
sure
not
she
good enough?
possessed. She drew a
Here
jagged
I
breath,
come.
the air biting and thin, and braced herself for what lay beyond the gate. The platform felt dangerously narrow against the vast, empty drop
Whoa!
below. Mira pivoted, her
But what
boots
if I'm
sliding
not ready?
slightly on the
What if
damp
I'm not
surface.
strong enough?
You
A tall
are stronger
figure
than
stood
you
near the
think.
heavy
Trust
iron
in
gates,
yourself.
motionless as a statue.
Don't let it get to you,
As she
Mira.
approached, the wind
This is
whipped
just
across
the
the
beginning.
landing, whistling through the stone archways and pulling at the man's heavy, dark fabric.
I'm
He did not
scared.
move to help her with her luggage. Instead, he watched her with sharp, focused intent. He took a step forward, his
The
movements
mist
rhythmic and
between
precise.
you and me
He stopped just
swirled
inches
in a
away,
miniature
the cold air swirling
Hmm?
between them. He did not
It's
offer a
time.
smile. He simply extended a hand, his fingers steady despite the freezing draft. You
The
must be
choice
Mira,
is
he
yours,
said.
but
His voice
remember,
carried
every
clearly over the
decision
low
has
moan of the
consequences.
wind. He glanced
Look
back
there.
toward the
The
massive,
tower?
silent structure looming behind him. The school has been waiting for you. He stood aside, gesturing toward the entrance. Mira looked at the towering
is the
shadow of the
way.
academy, and then back at him, but he only nodded, his gaze fixed on her with a strange, expectant intensity. The heavy gates groaned on rusted hinges, inviting her into the dark interior. The iron gates locked behind her with a sound like a hammer hitting an anvil. Mira stood in the foyer, catching her breath. The air inside was still, heavy with the scent of stagnant dust and cooling stone. She walked forward, her boots clicking against the polished floor, the sound ringing out and dying instantly in the vast, open space. She entered the great hall.
You have arrived.
It was in
Mira.
cavernous expanse,
Look,
arched
Mira,
and ribbed
these are the
like the
library's
inside of a
memory
giant
orbs.
ribcage.
They hold the
Hundreds of
essence
glass
our
lanterns
greatest
hung
story.
from the high rafters, but they were not burning. They flickered with a faint,
Look.
sickly pulse, barely holding back the
That one's
encroaching
not right.
shadows. The light
Look,
did not
Mira.
reach the corners of the
Even
room.
smallest
It clung to the
sparks
glass,
can light
gasping.
up the whole room.
Mira looked up, squinting against the
I
gloom.
think there's something
The weak,
down there.
dying glow cast long,
Let's take a
distorted
look.
shapes across the floor, making the
getting so
walls seem
cold.
to retreat
I can
and
see my
advance with
breath.
every faltering
Yeah, stay
heartbeat
close.
of the flame.
Something feels off.
There was no warmth here. The cold from the outside had followed her in, settling deep into the marrow of the hall. She took another step, her movement feeling small and insignificant beneath the rows of fading, lightless orbs. The school was not just silent, it was holding its breath, waiting for a spark that had not come for a very long time. 3 figures stood near a central pillar, their faces pale in the dying light. Mira approached, her footsteps hesitant. A boy with quick, darting eyes stepped forward first. "I am Finn," he said, his voice echoing too loudly. Beside
Look at
him,
the height of
a
this
girl
hall.
named Luna stood motionless,
They must be
staring
older than
upward,
anything we've
while a
ever
third
found.
boy, Toby, gripped his bag straps tight.
Oh,
Mira
no.
nodded, acknowledging them, but the silence
What's
between them was
happening?
interrupted by a low, grinding sound.
Whoa!
The stone floor beneath their feet shuddered. Above them, the massive arches began to sag and then straighten. A slow, rhythmic
this
movement,
place?
like a deep, waking breath. Finn stumbled, bracing his hands against the masonry.
Whoa.
Is it just me,
Look.
or is the whole place stretching? He asked. Mira looked up, watching the ceiling stone ripple. The architecture felt fluid, reacting to their presence with a deliberate,
heavy motion.
There is a tower
Luna pointed
there.
toward the highest, most shadowed tower. It feels like it is waiting for something.
she
This is
whispered.
ridiculous.
The air grew
We need to
dense,
find a way to
vibrating
turn
with
it
a
off.
low-frequency
I've been
hum that
trying,
made
but
their
it's no
teeth
use.
ache. Every pillar seemed to lean
What is
inward,
this place?
shifting its weight
Where
to
are we?
center on the four of them. The school was
Come
not
on,
merely
we
a
need to
building.
get back.
It was a
We
vast,
can do
waking
this.
consciousness, and its eyes were turned squarely upon the group. Professor Bramble stepped from the gloom, his footsteps silent on the
It's
cold
quite
stone.
tall.
He gestured to the glass orbs hanging above.
Everything
This place
here
is not
runs
for the
on
faint of heart,
starlight,
Mira.
he
You
said.
must be prepared
His
for what
voice was
lies
thin.
ahead.
Carrying the weight of a long, tired history. He reached
not
up and tapped the
responding,
base of
is
one
it?
lantern. It sputtered, a brief flash of white light illuminating his face, before fading back into a dull, rhythmic pulse.
You
These
can't just
lanterns
run off
keep us
like that. You
warm,
need to be
safe,
more
and
careful.
awake.
But look up
But the
there.
supply
I
is
saw
failing.
something move.
Toby glanced at the ceiling, his brow furrowed as he watched the shadows crawl closer. They look dim, Professor, he noted, his voice barely rising above the hum of the stone. Bramble sighed, a sound that seemed to drain the remaining heat from the air. The school has
Beware,
been sleeping
for the
a long
power
while.
contained
It has
within
been waiting
these
for a
stones
catalyst
is
to
not
draw
to
the
be
light back
trifled
in.
with.
Mira looked from the
Wow.
professor to the dark, yawning rafters. The reality of the situation settled over them. They were not just students.
Mia,
They were the
what's
only thing
happening?
preventing the academy from sinking into total, permanent darkness. The responsibility felt heavy, a physical pressure in the chest. Finn tightened his grip on his bag, looking around
can
as the
do
walls
this.
seemed to
I have
lean in,
to.
waiting for them to act. The
The path
professor did
ahead
not
is
wait for
fraught
their
with
questions to
dangers,
catch up.
But the call
He
of
turned,
knowledge is
his
stronger
movements
than
sharp
fear.
and purposeful, and led them toward
Farewell,
the
my
grand
dear.
staircase that spiraled into the
May
upper
your
gloom.
journey be
He stopped
safe.
halfway up, pointing a
mist
gnarled
is
finger toward the
responding.
highest summit,
It's
where a massive
swirling
bronze
faster.
shape hung suspended in the mist.
The
The waking
choice
bell,
is yours,
he announced,
But know
his
that
voice
with
reverberating
great
against
power
the vaulted
comes
stone.
great responsibility.
It does not ring for just any passerby. It remains silent through decades of mediocrity. He paused, letting the cold air sharpen the silence. It rings only when the school feels a new star who truly belongs. Mira felt a sudden, sharp tug in her chest, a sensation like a magnetic pull drawing her toward the peak. She stepped away from the others, her eyes fixed on the cold metal of the bell. It looked dormant, yet the air around it shimmered with a faint,
I must
static
be frank
charge.
with you, Miss Lovegood.
Luna watched
That is
her,
a path few
then
have
looked
walked,
back
and
at
even
Bramble,
fewer have
her
returned
own
from.
expression hardening with realization. The environment seemed to react to the mention of the bell. The mist parted slightly, revealing the steep, jagged climb ahead. Mira took a deep breath, her fingers curling into tight fists. The uncertainty that had plagued her since arrival began to crystallize into a singular, driving purpose. The staircase groaned.
Whoa!
Beneath
this
their
is
boots,
incredible!
the stone steps
Be
rippled
careful,
like
Finn.
water, sliding sideways
Ah!
and knitting themselves
Hold
into
on!
a new, steeper path. Finn stumbled, his arm flailing until Luna grabbed his sleeve, anchoring him against
you
the
all
sudden
right?
tilt.
I think
The
so.
entire
Just let me
corridor
try
stretched,
something.
the
This
walls
is it,
pulling
Toby.
away and then
I
snapping back
know.
with a sound like cracking
with
ice. Mira reached out, finding Toby's hand.
Her grip firm as the floor pitched forward
Whoa!
again. It is not just old,
Watch your
Finn
step.
gasped, his boots scraping for purchase on the shifting masonry.
The whole place is moving. Luna leaned into the wall, her palm pressed against the cold.
Vibrating stone. She felt the pulse of the academy beneath her skin, a rhythmic thrum that matched her own heartbeat. It is not just moving, she whispered, staring up at the arches that seemed to lean toward them with predatory curiosity.
It's
It
all
is
about
waiting.
channeling the energy.
The air
You
grew
just have
dense
to
with
believe in the
static,
magic, and it will work.
making the fine hairs on their arms stand upright. They huddled together
Whoa!
on a narrow landing
is
as a
this?
row of ceiling tiles rotated, revealing a
Wow.
labyrinth of gears
Look
that
at
groaned
that.
in the dark. The castle felt alive. A vast, mechanical beast that was currently
What are
weighing
they?
their worth, watching
don't
their
know,
every
but
step
they're
with a billion
watching.
unseen eyes. The group
Wow,
lingered on
look
the
at that.
mezzanine,
It's really
breathing hard
moving.
as the architecture
Whoa,
settled into a
it's
temporary,
huge.
uneasy stillness. Mira pulled her hand away from the others, the contact feeling suddenly distant. She looked up. The bell tower stood ahead, its silhouette cutting into the swirling gray mist like a needle. A strange, rhythmic thrumming vibrated through the soles of her boots, moving up her legs and settling deep in her chest. It was not a
So
sound,
this is where the
but a
magic
resonance,
happens.
a frequency that felt tailored to her own heartbeat. She walked toward the base of the tower, her steps slow and deliberate. The fear that had tightened her throat since she stepped
Oh.
off the gondola began to fray at the
It's
edges,
warm now.
unraveling into something far more stable. She reached out, pressing her palm against the
So,
freezing,
this is
weathered
how the
stone of
magic
the tower's
flows.
foundation. The surface felt warm, almost human, as if the castle were holding its breath, waiting for her specific touch. She had spent years moving through spaces where she felt like a ghost, an intruder in her own life. Here, the stone seemed to recognize her. She closed her eyes, letting the silence of the academy wrap around her. The anxiety was gone, replaced by a profound, quiet certainty.
It's beautiful.
She belonged to the height, the mist, and the stone. The stillness shattered.
Mira, look!
It
The wall
started
is
deep
breaking.
within the
Don't
masonry.
panic. We'll find a way out.
A low-frequency rumble that vibrated through the floorboards and rattled the teeth in their skulls. Mira pulled her hand back as the tower's base began to tremble. Fine dust rained down from the vaulted ceiling, coating their hair in gray grit. Finn grabbed the nearest pillar to steady himself, his knuckles straining as the entire structure swayed a fraction
I
of
can do
an
this.
inch.
I can do this.
The air grew heavy,
Toby, look!
thick with the
What's
scent
happening?
of ozone and ancient dormant
I don't
metal.
know, but we should
Every
do
lantern in the corridor flickered once.
Then dimmed, as if the
there you
academy
are.
itself were
A
diverting
pleasure to
all its
finally
remaining
make
power
your
toward the
acquaintance.
summit.
Luna backed away, her eyes fixed on the ceiling where the shadows seemed to pulse in time with the shaking stone.
Toby knelt, pressing his palms flat against the flagstones, feeling the rhythmic, mechanical heartbeat of the tower accelerate. It was not a
So it
random
begins.
tremor. It was the sound of something massive from the vault. The bronze bell, silent for decades, began to tilt against its rusted housing.
It's
A
alive.
high-pitched,
metallic
It's coming.
screech
We have to
echoed
do
through the
something.
shaft as the
I don't
striker
know how.
swung,
I can't
catching on the
breathe.
rim. The pressure in the room spiked, forcing them to gasp for air.
They stood
Professor Bramble,
paralyzed,
What is that thing?
caught in
A
the
bell
eye
of
of a
great
gathering
power,
storm,
one that has called
watching the
this
metal
mist to
giant
our
prepare to wake. The striker swung. It met the bronze rim with a force that defied physics, and the world vanished behind a single.
Deafening. The sound was
Finn,
not
are
merely
you okay?
heard.
I
It was a
think
physical
so.
blow
Are
that
you hurt?
slammed into their chests.
Forcing the breath from their lungs. It rippled outward,
A visible distortion in the air that cracked the floor tiles and sent shards of stone skittering into the dark. The vibration traveled through the marrow of their bones.
A deep,
can't- the
resonant
sound,
toll
it's too
that
much.
hummed with
Just
enough
breathe.
intensity
You're
to
strong,
make their
Luna.
vision
You
blur.
can do this. It was the sound of a century of silence being torn open. Dust erupted from every rafter, swirling in the wake of the sound wave like a violent gray blizzard. Mira
Let's
braced
dance.
herself, knees locked.
hands pressed against her ears, but the resonance
Just
pushed right
focus,
through,
Mira.
rattling her
You
jaw.
can do this.
The bell continued to oscillate.
Each passing second, sustaining the low,
Don't worry,
mournful,
I've
yet
got it.
powerful roar
Be
that
careful.
shook the very foundations of the academy.
The air grew frigid, then instantly scorching, as the magical feedback of the toll surged through the walls. They were no longer standing in a building, but at the center of a waking machine.
Everything's moving.
The
By
silence was gone,
ancient bell,
replaced by a
you have
thunderous,
truly
rhythmic pulse
awakened
that
the
demanded
power.
total surrender to the change.
The
What
final
happens
echo
now,
of the bell
sir?
died
The
away,
choice is yours,
leaving a
Mira,
ringing
but the
silence that lasted
consequences,
only a
they are
heartbeat.
real.
Then, the ceiling exploded into light. The hundreds of lanterns hanging from the rafters did not simply
Whoa.
ignite. They surged. Each glass orb shattered its dim, gray haze, replaced by a blinding, white-gold brilliance that poured into the hall like liquid fire. Mira shielded her eyes, but the radiance bled through her fingers, turning the very air into a glowing, electrified mist. The light was absolute.
This power,
It scoured
I
the
must
corners
hold
of the
it
hall,
back.
banishing the centuries of dust and shadow in a single, sweeping wave. Toby stumbled back,
What?
his hands
What?
pressed over his
What
face
is
as the
this?
intensity burned against his retinas. The lanterns
Don't
began to
worry,
hum,
Mira.
a high-frequency vibration
Everything
that
will be
harmonized
all
with
right.
the fading resonance of the bell. Finn reached out, his silhouette carved sharply against the sudden
Whoa.
glare, as the light intensified until the architecture itself seemed to lose its solidity. It was a spectacle of pure, unbridled energy. The Academy was
Wow,
no longer
it's
waiting.
beautiful.
It was actively claiming
Toby,
the space
look
around
down.
them. The brilliance surged from the lanterns, cascading down the walls, turning the cold stone into warm, pulsing gold. Every inch of the
watch
great
out.
hall was
Whoa.
now saturated with a blinding, golden heat that signaled the school had finally, violently, returned to life.
The ground beneath them groaned, a deep,
Mira,
grinding
watch
sound
out!
of stone
Finn,
against stone
what's
that rattled the
happening?
floorboards. Mira felt the floor tilt sharply to the left, sending her stumbling toward the wall. Beside her,
The grand staircase pulled itself loose from the
Rise
foundation,
and bear
its
witness to
heavy
the
steps
power of
sliding
magic.
and rotating like the teeth of a massive,
slow-moving gear. Finn lunged to grab a banister, but the wood shifted mid-reach, folding into the wall and locking into a new,
impossible
Toby,
angle.
Be careful.
The entire
The whole
academy was
thing could
reordering
collapse.
its own
I
skeleton.
have to try.
Magic flared in the air, manifesting as shimmering, orange embers that drifted downward, hissing as they touched the stone.
Toby tripped as a flagstone rose suddenly, creating a jagged obstacle in his path. He threw his weight back, arms windmilling to find purchase on the vibrating air.
Oh no!
The ceiling itself
What's
seemed to
happening?
stretch.
The rafters
hold on much
extending and
longer.
contracting as the hallway lengthened into a
Just
cavernous,
hang on.
shifting
I'm
corridor.
coming.
Every surface was in motion. Mira pressed her back against a pillar, watching the walls slide past one another in a rhythmic,
Whoa.
terrifying dance of geometry. The air was thick with
Whoa,
the scent of
look at all
ozone
this
and
dust.
pulverized rock. They were trapped in a fortress that refused to stay still.
Forced to scramble over the changing landscape as the school locked itself into a new,
Ready?
dangerous design.
Ready.
The grinding of stone finally faded, replaced by a low, rhythmic thrumming that pulsed through the floorboards. Mira pulled her hands from the pillar, her breath coming in ragged, shallow bursts.
What was that?
The corridor had stopped moving, but the air remained heavy, charged
I need
with
to
the lingering
rest,
scent of ozone
just for a
and
little
cooling
while.
rock. She pushed off the wall and took a hesitant step forward. In the periphery, a flicker of
What's
pale,
that?
rhythmic light caught her eye. It pulsed from a narrow, shadowed alcove where the stone had cracked open. Mira moved toward it, her boots scraping softly against the debris-strewn floor. As she drew closer, the light stuttered.
Huddled against the cold stone, a small winged creature pressed itself into the darkest corner,
Who's there?
its body trembling with every beat of its wings. Mira stopped 3 paces away. She did not reach out. She did not speak. She simply
Hello
shifted her
there.
weight, lowered her
It's
center of
okay.
gravity, and knelt on the hard surface. She extended one hand, palm open, and held it perfectly still in the dim, blue-tinged light.
It's okay.
The creature's
little one.
head snapped toward her, its eyes reflecting the faint, dying embers of magic that drifted down from the ceiling. It shivered, a sharp, jagged motion,
There you go.
but it did not retreat. Mira waited, her focus locked on the tiny, fragile rhythm of its breathing. The dragon took a tentative step,
Easy.
its claws
little
clicking
one.
softly against the stone floor. It paused, head cocked.
Evaluating the open palm, Mira remained motionless, her pulse thumping against her fingertips.
The creature
Whoa,
closed the distance
slow
in a
down
single,
there, little
fluid
fella.
motion, its wings brushing against her arm as it climbed.
It settled firmly against her shoulder, its small, cool weight
Hey,
grounding
little
her.
buddy.
Mira stood slowly, careful not to disturb the delicate balance.
Is
She turned to
that
find the others watching from the
baby
corridor
dragon?
entrance.
Luna caught her gaze and let out a soft, sharp breath. "He trusts you," she whispered. The tension in the hallway seemed to dissipate,
replaced by a sudden, sharp
this is it.
clarity.
Yeah.
The exhaustion that had weighed
Let's
on
do
their
this.
limbs vanished, replaced
go,
by a
Finn.
surge of
We have
resolve.
to see what's
They
at the
looked
top.
toward the end
Yeah,
of the corridor,
let's-
where the main stairwell spiraled upward into the gloom. Mira adjusted her stance. The dragon's tail coiled securely against her neck. The group moved as one, their pace
Whoa,
quickening
look at
as
that.
they stepped
Come
over
on,
the
we're
jagged
almost
debris.
there.
They were no longer just reacting
What's
to the
going on
school's
here?
shifting
I'm not
geometry.
sure, but I think
They were
we're about
moving
to
with
find
intent.
out.
Each step forward felt lighter, fueled by the quiet, radiant heat radiating from the creature on her shoulder. The path to the summit was open. They pushed through the final heavy iron
Wow,
doors
look at this.
and onto the exposed
Hold on
stone
tight.
landing. The transition was brutal.
This
The
is
air here was
crazy.
not the
I can't
stagnant,
see
magical
anything.
draft of
Just
the
hold on
hallways,
tight.
but a
We're
roaring,
almost there.
Freezing gale that tore at their balance. Mira stumbled,
Whoa.
digging her boots into the
Thanks.
slick rock to stay upright. Ahead, near the base of the spiraling tower stairs,
Come back!
a small,
You can't
round
go out
shape
there!
tumbled through an open archway. It was Pip. The sprite had been navigating the perimeter when the wind caught it. The creature spun
who are
wildly,
you?
its soft, rounded form buffeted like a leaf in a storm. It reached out, fingers clawing at the empty air, but the gust was relentless. It shoved the sprite
Oh my
toward the edge of the
God!
landing where the stone gave way to the endless.
swirling mist below. The group stopped dead. Toby shouted.
But the wind swallowed his voice before it reached them. Finn lunged
Finn,
forward,
are you
then
okay?
skidded back as a fresh wave of pressure pinned him against the masonry. They watched
Mira,
in
be
paralyzed
careful.
horror
I
as
have
Pip
to
was
try.
lifted completely off the ground, its tiny limbs flailing.
Easy.
The sprite drifted toward the perimeter, inches
stay
from the
there.
drop, caught in a
Whoa.
vortex that showed no signs of breaking.
It's alive.
The distance between safety and the abyss vanished in a heartbeat.
Mira did
Whoa.
not think.
Careful
She
there.
lunged, fingers
got
locking
you.
around Finn's wrist. Finn grabbed Luna, and Luna's hand
Are we
clamped
really
onto
going to do
Toby's arm.
this?
Yes,
They formed
we
a
have to.
frantic,
For
jagged
everyone
line that
back
stretched
home.
out into the roar of the gale. Mira leaned forward, her boots scraping grooves into the stone as the wind fought to pull her feet out from under her. Her shoulder burned under the strain of the weight,
Come on.
but she held firm.
You have to work.
Toby reached out, his arm trembling as the wind hammered against his back. He lunged
Come on.
once, twice, fingers brushing the sprite's soft, drifting form. On the third attempt, his hand closed around the small, cool body of the cloud sprite. He pulled back hard, collapsing against the rest of the chain. Mira braced her legs, heaved the line backward, and dragged the entire group away from the ledge.
They hit the cold stone floor in a tangled heap, gasping for air. The sprite nestled into the center of their circle. Safe, they remained locked together for a long moment, their collective breath coming in ragged.
Unified
we need to get to the
gasps.
top of that tower.
The wind continued
But
to
it's so
scream against
high.
the tower
What if we
walls,
can't
but it
make
could no
it?
longer move them. They were anchored,
We'll get through
not
this
just by the
together.
stone, but by the
I
grip
know.
of their own joined hands. They scrambled
Come
up the
on,
final
we're getting
spiral of
close.
stone stairs,
I think we're
feet
going the
clattering
wrong
against the
way.
steps. Their lungs burned, and the air grew thin, smelling of ancient metal and ozone. Mira hit the heavy wooden door, pushing it
Whoa!
wide with a shoulder check.
We need to get out
They
of
burst
here.
inside,
But look at this
ready to
place.
confront
It's
the force
incredible.
that had commanded the academy. They stopped. The tower was empty. The great bronze bell hung motionless in the center of the chamber, its surface still shimmering with a faint, fading heat.
Can't.
There was no rope,
It's
there
so
was no
warm.
ringer, no hidden mechanism moved,
Look
and no
up
shadow lurked in the
Nothing
rafters.
there. Keep
The
searching.
silence that followed was absolute, heavy, and profound. Toby walked to the edge of the platform, looking down at the academy below. The gray mist was beginning to fracture, revealing vibrant, pulsing streaks of color
What's
underneath. Mira looked back at the bell, then at her own hands, which were still tingling with a residual,
Whoa,
static
this is
charge.
incredible.
The realization settled in
okay.
with the weight of
I
stone.
get it now.
The bell had not rung because of a mechanism or a ghost. It had rung because they had stepped into the tower.
So that's how it's
The
done.
academy had not been
The pattern
waiting
is
for an
complete.
object to strike the bronze. It had been waiting for them. The tower had
This
not
is
needed
our
a ringer.
chance.
It had needed
Wow.
a spark. Professor Bramble appeared in the doorway, his pace steady, his gaze fixed on the
Time
quiet
has
group.
come.
He stopped, looking from the
The
silent
orb
bell to the four
responds to
students.
the will of
He
those
gestured
who dare
toward the
to
center of
touch
the
it.
hall where the great lantern hung, a
The
dormant,
answer is not in the
glass-encased
stars nor
orb.
the pages
The
of
Academy
books.
needs a pulse,
It is
he
here,
said.
deep within
It
us.
requires a shared intent. Mira stepped forward,
it's getting
her palms
brighter.
raised toward the cool surface of the
Wow.
lantern. Finn, Luna, and Toby
The
joined
glass is
her,
responding
forming
to
a
me.
circle around
Toby,
the glass.
be careful.
Mira
It
pressed
might
her
be
hands against the
dangerous.
frame. She felt a pull, a deep, rhythmic tugging at her chest. She pushed back, pouring her focus into the center. A spark
Finn,
jumped from her
what is
fingertips,
this?
followed by
I-
a steady,
I
golden
don't
hum.
know.
The
It's
others mirrored
glowing.
her movement.
The dim glass ignited. A wave of warmth surged
Wow!
outward,
The
turning the
great
gray
lantern
mist
has
into
awaked.
golden, swirling light. The color flooded the halls, stripping away the cold shadows and
Look,
replacing them
it's
with a
alive.
vibrant, living
Wow.
glow. Every lantern in the rafters flared to life, casting long, dancing shadows
It
across
is
the stone.
time.
The
Whoa,
Academy
look at
groaned,
this place.
a
It's
sound of heavy
amazing.
masonry
Incredible.
settling into place,
Everything is
as if
moving
the
like
very
it's
walls
alive.
were exhaling.
The air turned thick with heat and light,
Let it
filling the
flow
vast
through you,
space with a
child.
sudden, overwhelming sense of
Master.
presence.
The terrace was cool, a sharp contrast to the heat still radiating from the great hall. The four
Wow,
friends
look at
slumped
that
onto
one.
the stone
It's so
benches,
bright.
watching
Yeah,
the
it's
constellations
beautiful,
wheel
isn't
slowly
it?
overhead in the clear, dark sky. The Academy felt different now, solid,
I
grounded,
wish I
and
could
alive.
explore more of
Mira
this
sat on
world.
the edge of the parapet, her legs dangling over the abyss of the clouds. The moon dragon crept from the shadows and curled against the side of her neck, its small body radiating a steady, rhythmic pulse. She leaned her head back, closing her eyes to the wind. The frantic pace of the day, the climbing, the fear, and the sudden light finally
It's
settled into a
beautiful,
quiet
isn't
hum.
it?
She looked at her friends, then back to the horizon where the stars seemed to mirror the glow of the lanterns below. "I finally fit somewhere," she said. The words were soft, barely
Mira,
audible
look.
over the
The
breeze,
clouds are dancing.
but they held the
They
weight
are
of a
beautiful.
long
It
journey.
feels like we're really
Luna sat beside her, resting a hand on the stone rail.
Look
"The
at
school
that.
told us so itself,"
It's
she replied.
beautiful.
Mira looked down at the Academy, watching the patterns of light shift across the towers. For the first time, the vast, echoing space
One day,
felt like a
I'll
home
go there.
instead of a
Me
maze.
too.
The dragon let out a soft, flickering sigh, and the night remained still, while the terrace
Wow,
remained
it's
bathed in the
even
steady
more
glow
beautiful
of the
than I imagined.
constellations. A change rippled through the foundations of the Academy. Deep in the oldest wing, where the stone walls had not felt a footfall in centuries, a single lantern hanging from a rusted iron bracket began to oscillate.
The golden light within the glass sputtered, grew thin, and then vanished. Darkness rushed in to fill the void. A faint, sharp sound echoed through the vacant corridor,
The
the sound of
cold has
glass
finally
contracting in
reached
extreme
us.
cold. A pool of blue shadow seeped from the base of the wall, moving across the flagstones like liquid ink. It did not just obscure the floor, it drained the warmth from the air, leaving a thin layer of frost on the
From
nearby
the dome
carvings.
tool,
The shadow
a
pooled,
vessel is
deepened, and
raised.
rose, taking the shape of a jagged, shifting silhouette against the masonry. From the center of this
What is
darkness,
that?
a sound emerged,
Whisper
not a breeze,
is the
but a
song
soft,
of the
rhythmic
ice.
intake of breath. It was a whisper, dry and hollow, carrying a weight that the stone walls could not contain. The sound drifted upward, searching, while the friends on the terrace continued
Look!
to watch the stars,
It's so
unaware of the
beautiful.
chill rising beneath their feet.